Thank you for joining us on Data Cloud Now, where we bring you the latest in all things data in business and industry. I'm Ryan Green, and I'm joined by industry veteran Wendy Turner-Williams. Wendy, thank you so much for joining me on Data Cloud Now.
I thank you so much for having me, Ryan. I'm excited to be here.
Held leading data positions at Microsoft, Salesforce, and Tableau. How did your journey help you think about the role data has in everyday society?
Yeah, I think when you think about some of these companies like Microsoft and Salesforce and Tableau, really they work across all industries, right? And a lot of those industries even support your day-to-day life, whether you're going to a GameStop and buying video games or using your Xbox, or you've got a restaurant and you're tracking your customers or engagement and marketing out of a Nordstrom company. When you work in an industry agnostic corporation who's providing software and services, that software is about collecting data, right? That's meaningful to other people to make some sort of decision. So always having to focus on what is the customer experience and the user experience to use that data to make that decision is really kind of a key part of a CDO role in running our own business and making successful products.
Thank you for that, Wendy. Every organization has a different feel and culture. How is it adapting to new environments and teams? And any advice for the audience watching?
That's one of the million-dollar questions. We all hear the term data culture and wanting to be data-driven. In fact, there was a McKinsey statistic I heard recently that 83% of CEOs want to be data-driven, but only 30% actually believe they are. And often that's because of culture. When it comes to data, you need to be able to knock down data silos for the processes that are cutting your different business units in order to truly use that data in a way that you can be strategic in nature and do end-to-end decision making. So I think that when it comes to, really being focused on that culture, et cetera, it has to be more than lip service. You have to build the right types of tools and environments that allow people to collaborate on end-to-end business processes, to look at those strategies. And you have to have a data strategy that ties to that business strategy enablement with the culture built around with the collaboration and the proper tools skills related for data literacy, et cetera, in order to really reap that value of the data.
I think great point. I think authenticity as well, specifically as it relates to culture, Wendy, is extremely important now more than ever.
100% believe with that. I mean, you can't have a culture without being authentic to that culture, right? So like I said, you can't really have a lip service that you want to have culture without actually investing in the culture to make it a reality. And that requires, like I said, investment, right? Not just tools, but actually, how do you collaborate effectively? How do you take something like, a marketing event and actually enable finance to use that same information or that same data in order to fast track things like Salesforce cast or, incentive comp across your organizations? That comes down to your culture. And how do you actually drive a collective unit? We are all for one for all culture within your company to actually realize the data across the board.
Wendy, I want to get into the role specifically of the chief data officer. Often in the past, the CDO was coupled in with roles like COO and CMO. How will the role of the CDO continue to evolve in the future?
Yeah, that is an incredible question, and something I think so many of us are looking at who are actually in the roles. I think that the CDOs, you're going to see more and more focus on making that a unique kind of accountable area for the future. Too often we have CIOs who have a CDO reporting to them, and the reality is that you have a disconnect in priorities, right? The CIO needs to focus on the bucket, right? The infrastructure, while the CDOs need to focus on what's pumping through that bucket or what's being held in that bucket. Same thing when you think about CMOs, et cetera. Data is an asset to a company. And when you say that, what you're really saying is that all data is an asset to that company. And once you're getting into too specific of line of businesses or too specific of priorities based on that line of business from a C-suite perspective and not someone looking holistically across the board, you're just not able to reduce the risks that you should across each one of those landscapes, protect your brand in the way that you should across those landscapes, or monetize effectively, right? Or cross leverage and really drive that workflow automation to improve your operations across organizations as well. And that's where the CDO really needs to focus. In addition, one more thing, if you think about things like GDPR or CCPA from a defensive perspective side of data versus offense, we need to partner with Cisco's, we need to partner with the CIO, but really that operationalization that needs to happen with the data, right? To truly understand what data we have, who's consuming that data, for what purposes, what it's actually supposed to be used for, and then who's accountable for that data, whether you're a processor or a sub-processor or anything else, comes down to the CDOs who know more about the data than anyone else for the company. So again, whether it's a pure protection against fines or that monetization or that next business opportunity right across the window, having that macro lens is the value and needs to be the accountable area for a CDO all up.
And really, at the end of the day, causing alignment at the executive level.
I think of CDOs, in fact, I tell people this all the time. Our job, we don't own any data. Our job is almost like enabler across the company to help anyone else to make
That's a great way of putting it.
Decisions that they need to make with the data that they need at the right time that they need it, with the right handling around it, right? That is our job. Our job is almost like a peer across that entire C-suite level to be the glue of the corporate strategies and how those strategies work across the data points and the applications, and be a servant to actually making sure we have the insights we need to be effective as a company.
I love that glue analogy. Now, Wendy, I'd love your macro perspective. Given the various seats you've had in the industry, what trends have you observed leading organizations take in accelerating their enterprises' move to the data cloud?
I think cloud is, obviously the direction for the future. I think as people are thinking about the connectivity of their data across multiple substrates and the different kind of cloud services that are spinning up more and more and more, having an on-prem world and having resources to support that on-prem world is just impractical anymore. It's all about how can you connect across multiple substrates. To do that, I think some of the trends that are really interesting to me are things like data management. Okay, that becomes more and more complex when it's leaving your dedicated kind of storage areas related to data. So, data management at scale with meshes that are really connecting the ability for you to see what you actually have from a data perspective and to use it effectively within your company is incredibly important. I think that operations and cost management associated to clouds is something where people are spending a lot of time as well. Because frankly, the way that clouds function, just as an uplift for a compute perspective, is different than on-prem traditional technologies. So I think that sometimes the cost and the experience is a little bit higher than people expect it to. And if you lifted and shifted your data, then it's likely not going to work as you expect from a cost perspective. So people need to think about the data itself, what's being stored, what should be stored, maybe do data cleanup, in addition to their actual technology decisions from an architecture perspective in regards to the cloud. I also think that three other areas are really top of mind for me. We hear culture so much, and I've already talked about culture, but I think that you have to have employees who truly are data literate. And I think when it comes to being data literate, this isn't just about the skill sets needed by a data professional to do their job. This is about executives actually knowing how data processing works end to end, understanding how business processes create certain types of data in certain applications, which is then reused by other applications and other processes. So people start to understand things like new monetization opportunities, or again, operational improvements, workflow AI type of improvements, as well as how you can actually improve things like cross-selling, upselling across different types of products or experiences. I also think that when it comes to literacy, you can't have culture without literacy. So again, back to that investment in, you can't just talk data culture, you have to walk it. And that requires you to really focus on your employee base and their understanding of data processes. The other area that I think is really, really interesting comes with ethics. And I think as we're moving more and more towards an AI world, an automated world, things like GB chat and everything we're seeing all over the world.
The news these days.
Exactly. Policy is one thing from a governance perspective, but if you don't have an ethics framework that actually speaks to your values as a customer and your obligations and commitments that you've expressed with your customers about how you handle their data, that's another area where people need to double down, because AI's here, right? I mean, it's not sci-fi anymore. It's here. It's happening. There's AI every day, just like there's data that's feeding that AI every day. And you have to have an ethics backbone in order to understand how you're going to use that data based on your values. So those are the two areas that I think there's a lot of interest. Data mesh, again, data fabrics for governance, scalability, ethics, and AI.
Thank you, Wendy. I want to dive specifically into certain industries. When you take a look at industries across the board, which sectors are really leading the way in relation to the way they're using their data?
I think tech companies themselves, because again, they often are building the products that others are using, which means they've got to innovate and understand the end-to-end kind of process of data engineering or data analytics in order to do that. I think fintech is an area where, from a compliance, from a regulatory perspective, they have to. So I know they've really kind of doubled down in fintech investment areas related to data. And one of the areas that I'm seeing really kind of rise up, and I'm super passionate about rising up, is around healthcare and biotech. I mean, we've all gone through COVID the last several years and the impacts that's had worldwide. It happens at this location. It has no impact on me anymore. We realize how things work. And when it comes to, your doctor's visits, your ability to look holistically at patient healthcare, et cetera, that's all about having more information. It's all about having kind of new diagnostic tools and tips that tie into a lot of that data. And I'm seeing a lot of pickup in regards to the industries in that space in regards to modernization, which is incredible. So those are some of the top three that I really see on a day-to-day basis when conversations who are super active in investments in modernization and really, really kind of leading the way.
I want to focus a little bit on some challenges. From your perspective, what have you observed as companies grapple with their data and some of the challenges that they're facing on a day-to-day basis?
So I spend a lot of time having this conversation, because the reality is that tech is an enabler. Okay. And there's lots of tech, but usually most of the problems when it comes to actually reaping the value of your technology investment are more around the process or the culture or other things associated to data. So I spend a lot of time talking to other CDOs as a peer, right? We're learning from each other, we're sharing experiences. And what I hear consistently is that things like not having proper investment, your boards or your CEOs not understanding the cost associated to not just the technology or the project, but the investment in your employees from the usability perspective, or the training when it comes to, again, understanding processes that are stringed together for automation purposes. Things like keeping up with your current state of operations of what's already been published and net new initiatives and projects and priorities, and being able to do that at scale. Teams that are trying to basically move from a centralized kind of old school model where you had one data warehouse and people that were controlling publications there, into federated self-service models where you can support multiple priorities at one time by different business units who are always going to have their number one, and enabling that workforce to be able to work at their own pace. I think the reality when it comes to problems is that, I think McKinsey published this, there's 79 zettabytes of data as of 2021 is the estimate. That's 79 plus 21 zeros after it.
My brain can't even comprehend this number.
It's incredibly hard. So it's not that we're struggling to create data. The problems that we're actually having now are more about how do we actually use that data effectively. And again, technology is one angle to that problem, but it doesn't solve your culture issues. It doesn't solve your process issues. It doesn't solve the usability if you're not thinking about the data itself and your culture and your literacy aspects as a part of it, or your data management. Data management across 79 zettabytes of data is an unbelievably complicated thing when you're thinking about quality or policies, etc. So just, again, understanding the scale, there's a lot of common choke points associated to data, and you hear them industry agnostic. They're all the same. Culture, funding, prioritization, scalability into self-service, and trust, whether it's quality or privacy or ethics or compliance, and how do you do all of them at the same time?
And I also, one area that I'd also add to that as well is discipline as well. It's the consistent discipline of always having those areas at the forefront.
That's right. I mean, when you think about data, it's not one and done, right? Data is never one and done. You know, a technology shift may be one and done, but the data pumping through it is never one and done. There's always new sources. There's always new acquisitions. There's always new strategies. There's always new tech coming and going. I think one of the interesting factoids I heard recently was 98% of companies fail to scale analytics. 98% of companies fail to scale analytics. 95% of those companies blame cultural challenges. People working in silos, people not politics, data politics are a thing. So again, back to your question in general about choke points or the downsides, most of these are the soft points around data. Again, tech doesn't solve for them. It's about creating the right culture and balance and drive within your actual company in order to make data a center of excellence and make sure everyone is skilled appropriately and remove those cultural challenges so that you can actually reap the value of your data as an asset.
You know, Wendy, we covered briefly the public sector, but I want to take a little bit of a deeper dive there. What specifically within that sector in relation to barriers to entry are you seeing? And are there major concerns that specifically the public sector are noticing in relation to data?
That's a really good question as well. You know, I think that getting the public sector up to the point where they're more effective with data is something that's going to be good for, you know, humans in general and for companies in general. I think the biggest barrier is often the expense of the tech, right? As I said, tech is one component. You've got to have tech for your storage or for your processing, etc. And the reality is that most of the public companies really struggle with the investment it takes to do that from a monetary perspective. Then I think when it comes with that in addition is then, of course, making sure that you actually have the skill sets and can hire the talent around that investment as well. So that's most of the struggle that I've seen is around just the investment that it takes and the funding model to do that for public. It is very, very difficult. I think that, you know, this is where the tech companies, at least at Tableau and at Salesforce and even Microsoft, I know, we do a lot of work with public entities when it comes to philanthropy, et cetera, to basically try to help them get the technology that they need if they can't have the monetary value to actually support the purchase of the buy of the licenses in order to still get, you know, value. I know for me in particular, I do a lot of work with like the University of Washington and their informatics school, or during COVID, there was a lot of work with a lot of the kind of COVID tracing and the news and making sure that the right heat maps and where were the breakouts happening, et cetera, were getting into the right hands. And so to me, there really needs to be a partnership between tech to make sure that public doesn't get left behind when it comes to the embracing of data as a core kind of area of accountability and assets, as well as making sure that they get access to the technology to help them actually get to data.
You know, Wendy, I want to key in on something specifically that you raised, and that's the partnership between tech and public. Could you elaborate a little bit on that and how the future could look to where they can mutually be beneficial towards each other?
Yeah, I think that when it comes to the public, as I mentioned, they often can't afford, you know, they can't afford the technology based on what their core mission is. So in my opinion, you know, I think COVID is a perfect example of this. tech needs to invest in a lot of the data for good or general public kind of areas, because most of the tech companies, the software for them, they make it, they can do free trials, they can give people a kind of comped or philanthropy kind of areas. And the goodness that comes out when it comes to diversity or equity or literacy down in public schools, down to grade school children, and really training people at a very young age to be data literate when we're moving towards this data and AI world and robotics world, or things like, again, COVID tracking, which impacts everyone across the globe. Those are things that the tech needs to invest in, because it behooves them as an employee base, it behooves them as a community or a city or a state and their future employees to make sure that we have the investments where we need to in the public realm.
And I think referencing COVID is a great example, on the sense that at the end of the day, we're all in this together. So the more partnerships that can benefit the general public, the better.
Absolutely. Again, even things like, how do we get more, underprivileged or more diversity into our products? Or how do we actually, economics have a push and pull. You don't have an economic impact in one particular area that doesn't have some type of pull on another, right? When you think about things as a society, and we're one kind of society, I don't want to get too philosophical, but we're one society, and we know that we have impacts across the board. The more we do to inform and make decisions based on actual information that is bringing more diversity and more good outcomes across the world, the better. And to me, that is tech needs to invest in the public sector.
Hey, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the conversation with Wendy Turner-Williams. I know I sure did. I'm Ryan Green with Data Cloud Now. We'll see you soon.